morality says as moral obligation. Methics practical reasons A. Methics establish a bias morality. Ask the question why should just only practical reason that deductive foundation for X question concedes power. Tactically concedes the very authority. B. Only practical reasons that hold a responsible action. Reasons necessary for individuals to be where they're just necessary for morality guide action. C. In order for a judge to have a decision, they have to have a reason for decision. That's why we call it a reason for decision. Reasons don't determine who wins the debate. Well, so debate was resolved in arbitrary decisions under practical reason. Each rational desires, non-empirical, operate feature of the will of your for your rational since the only relevant factor in terms of formation intent, external factors are relevant and different of cognitive abilities. Cognitive abilities will affect diminished capacity instrumental to any given and not necessary to assess the sentence themselves as practical reasons dictates. Additionally, inductive reason fails, so more interpretation cannot consequence of nonsensical Hume. Of course, the nature may change, but PB tend to different effects. Man, I can see that choose flourish in January decay and June. Past experience must be probable amidst all satisfactory arguments of existence of certain cause and effect, knowledge of entirely experience and conclusions of what's future comparable to last supposition going in a circle. Next. This means empirical justification fails because not by somebody sound. This includes any distinctions that are empirically justified. Next, practical reason implies that we have moral accountability based on desert course guard. Total responsible for action is free. You are capable of acting morally. You enter a relationship of reciprocity and someone in exchange of lawless behavior. Reciprocity, you are prepared to cooperate and you're willing to deal with her expectation that each of you act in a certain way, have reason and are valued. That's no ethical theory denying the importance of deserve. No one deserves anything. You couldn't say someone deserves something treated a certain way, like ethical theory demands. For example, under Rawls, we deserve political side that help protect so we swap. Thus, deserves side controlling any ethical theory based on certain ideas of allocating rights of what people deserve. Purchase the burn. If right to make a town's milk choice serves as some individuals have some sort of input in medical system to make process without a process cannot be deserved based because taking account individual preferences. Thus, deserve to make a general duty grading times milk choice to some populace of general duty. Each investigation of the duty is also obligatory. Thus, the negatives demonstrate exception to the rule. Let me see firm. This means the negative is proactive or pretty morally relevant distinction between adults and capable adults who would otherwise have the right. Whereas the absence prove no morally relevant distinction exists between the two. First, for 5 reasons. First, morality must take certain idea of judges to the same moral status. Otherwise, it would be arbitrary. Arbitrary is not sensible because practically some holy base of soul theory. Thus, since A, arbitrary principles definitely do not look to reasons. Arbitrary principles don't require justification. Reason ability to look question arbitrary principles don't require justification. Arbitrary principles are anti-ethical to morality. B. Pop-up box. Arbitrary principle not derived from the will. Practical reason will maximum legitimate because operator choose mean legitimate will, but arbitrary principle factors outside the influence of making decision making means inconsistent with reason. C. Since arbitrariness only describes moral system, even when describes that moral system followed by arbitrary principle will guide action. Second, we assume the individuals have some certain worth. A proactive claim to evaluate that worth. Nobody with consent to a system did it otherwise because nobody guarantee a right proactive between look proactive justification. Instead, prerequisite to any ethical system. The system doesn't consent to. At worst, have a right doesn't find we exercise right. For example, either right to make silence, still talk complete, saying consent to right not contrary to otherwise. A positive right function as a tool in toolbox. Otherwise, isn't conditional on exercise right in certain scenarios. Logically, also have the right. Third, the rest of the evaluation of actors, not actions, specify the right carrying capacity of a certain group of people rather than government action we ought to take. The action of guiding obligations only specified in a specified resolution. Advice are not being questioned. This means the AC burden to prove a specific resolution situation. The burden must be rejected. More of a skepticism is true. No morally relevant distinction can be drawn. Morally relevant distinction presumes that something existing morally evident ends for indifference. No distinction can be morally relevant. That means you affirm. Fourth, there isn't distinction between adolescents and capable adolescents and adults. That means resolution be rephrased as they ought to have the right. They already know they have. And all moral theories assume that moral equivalents are proven otherwise. No inherent distinction among people. Epistemology demands that certain equivalents and concepts is assumed. Otherwise, non-falsifiable assumptions not discovered yet. Non-falsifiable assumptions are bad because they render inquiry meaningless and not proven true or false. This means neg proves a difference. That means you assume they're same. Fifth, only ought to prove specifically why adolescents ought to have the right to make a task motor choice. Clarify that they cannot. They must concede that capable adults ought to have the right to make a task motor choice. A reciprocity of this, and they can either deny that they ought to have the right, or adolescents or both groups ought to have the right, giving them a 2-1 advantage. Reciprocity key call opportunities about B clash. The new system is the AC. Move system is the AC offense because they indict what is time specifying why task medical choices mean that the adolescents are uniquely be able to make them. This unavoidable intern because I have to spend more time on the 6 minutes. Clash key to education. Education benefits being topic. C. Women's proving autonomous medical choices generic but as extra topical because that makes the idea of adolescence a meaningless specification of the resolution. Laying the neg donor offense in multiple scenarios. Umbrella topic. Literature key to affairs dictates the debater's advocacy. D. Topic education. Generic autonomy bad offense in particular. Adolescents discussing topics in general topic. Topic education is key to education because it sends aside the individual around. E. Text. The resolution has the right, not a right, implying that such a right is already afforded to a certain group of people, proposing a certain group altogether. Text is key to affairs both appears advocacy. At worst, this means the resolution assumes the right exists. A resolution assumption, function as a condition of evaluation, but since the logic condition dictates the answer is false, the entire conditional statement is true. That means we affirm. Part 3 is no distinctions. First, any distinction based on age is arbitrary. And adolescence is a young person who is developing into adult, which varies on certain thresholds, but there's no arbitrary distinction delineation between development and a certain process. Means the definition concedes the arbitrariness. At worst, the adolescent's some same mental capacity, and mental development doesn't end with adulthood. Brower. No current research says certain brain traits are teenagers look at behavioral problems. It's impossible to say what teenagers are biologically mature, and the brain continues to develop into adult. MRI probe of 176 healthy volunteers ages 7 to 87 report that white brain doesn't peak until the age of 45 and gray matter to the age of 30. Crossed by framework warns why arbitraries can't function on any moral ethical theory, and also development can never function as foundation or morally relevant distinction. Boyle and Lavin. And recognize plant is budding. We are relating to the plant general conception of the plant, but the general idea of the plant is only against the instance of the certain idea of knowledge of the plant. Descriptions of self-change individuals to discern background, the nature of things, principles of motion change, or not to the chance of understanding the nature of things. Second, reserve based on reasons is A. It's an ancient neutral theory. Its particular agent maximum is irrelevant. Only agent look those are relevant ideas in the resolution of parallel structure. 2 operates treatment. Cut that argument at treatment. Now B, brain development doesn't function any more under the framework. Boyle 11.2. Instead of the charge of the certain practical reason, only look at reasons how we look at those reflected concepts. The point of saying a rational believer must take certain beliefs. A rational believer only those grounds of holding the belief, which means that rational consent only implicitly look at those predicated on certain propositions aspects that have plain enough sense. Underview. Skip the rest of the substance. One presume after counterbalance has unique when percentage ability to tariff that is the AC for her theory about presumption. Theory fans value should also unfairness voter proceed some sure facts better basis not the unfair advantage and drop the argument negative and real value out from their interpretation. A binary T definitions make the absolute T no matter what I run the AC. I had to pick an interrupt. Don't push me growing around line. B the rest of the vague different types of adolescents in the real world, so I know you know which interrupt you're gonna choose because see, I can't read T get them as a T drop very no non-exact no reciprocal advantage. Also, T and a half RV obvious next spread the 1 AR. I don't have time to deal multiple cells and substance. Also drop the words by the after unique disadvantage theory. Also independently justify an RVI and drop the beer and I mean so be saying sort of increase the counterpation trigger RVI. See experience some time to clarify factors prior to running theory. Also, no 2 in RVI, so they can spread the 1 AR and read every round by reading a piece of fencing. Copy theory 2 in R. I always lose because I have only 3 minutes to respond to 6-minute scripts. I'm gonna cut off what I didn't read.
Yeah, can you delete?
Yeah. I read all that. I didn't read this.
Maybe you should read that.
Yeah.
So we didn't read
And then if you go to the contention, I go up. Oh, yeah, I'll show you exactly. Yeah, keep going. Yeah, I think that's exactly where I stopped.
right here.
Go up a little more. No. I just want to see that. Yeah, keep like the highlighting here, and then just like scroll up a little bit. I just want to make sure I read that. Keep going. Yeah, I read that part. So yeah, what do you have highlighted?
Okay.
Those terms of the impact of that framework.
Alright. Ready?
Why don't we just read
Yep.
Are there any reasons to affirm separate from a normative framework?
What do you mean by that?
So, what I mean is, are there any a prioris in the F?
So I'd say there's the conditional logic argument, which means if you deny the right to exist, that would trigger conditional logic. Besides that, I don't think so.
Okay, let's talk about the burden structure.
Yeah.
Okay, so the third. Let's talk about the third reason that you read under the burden.
Yep.
Can you explain this argument?
The one about the resolution being about actors, not actions?
Yeah.
Okay, so the resolution specified the idea of actors, not actions. Like it talks about how we ought to give the right to autonomous multiple choices to adolescents. So it's not about an action the government ought to take because it assumes that the adolescent already has the right carrying capacity, the like ability to carry that right. So that means we have to recognize the idea of actors, not actions, such as adolescents and capable adults.
Will you defend the legal implementation of a right for adolescents?
What would that entail for me?
That I'm able to read disads or things that are wrong with the app if it was implemented in the real world.
I don't think you proving that would meet your burden, but sure, I will defend a legal right.
Okay, so you will defend that a country that if I read a disad about governments implementing the plan or the app.
I don't see how that would meet the burden that the app sets up,
so
but sure.
separate from the burden structure.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Let's talk about the reasons why. Why does so you speak all neg offense must prove specifically why adolescents ought not have the right.
Yeah.
What does this entail?
So you cannot say that stuff like autonomy doesn't exist or that the right doesn't exist or stuff like that. You can't deny that. You have to concede that capable adults ought to have the right or already have the right to make autonomous medical choices.
Okay. If I answer the framework, are there any reasons that it would trigger skepticism or presumption? If I prove that reason,
definitely not skepticism. It would depend on presumption. I don't know. I'm not just going to randomly trigger presumption off of random arguments. I think things such as indicting assumptions of the resolution would probably trigger presumption, but just triggering presumption randomly off certain framework arguments like contingent standards, no.
Okay. So you said that indicting the assumptions of the app triggers presumption.
Indicting assumptions of the res.
Of the resolution.
Yeah.
But you also say that this triggers condo logic. So which one is it?
Indicting assumptions of resolution. Sorry, indicting assumption of resolution does trigger conventional logic. Indicting assumptions of the app would, it'd probably not trigger presumption. Probably presumption. The only time we trigger presumption is if there was if we weren't be able to determine offense, right?
Okay.
Discriminate between offense.
All right,
yeah,
that's fine. Starting prep.
use my stand. Should I leave it here?
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Did you read? Oh, okay, never mind. You only read the theoretical reasons to presume an affirm.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So Af gets RBIs, but Neg doesn't.
It's specific. I think there are extrapolations that could be made theory. The AF-RV arguments in the AF are specific to T. I just say, yeah, you don't get 2 in RBIs.
Okay. So you get an RBI because it's of times Q, and also is times Q one of the warrants for RBI?
Okay, so first of all, I say the justifications for why T's drop the argument are also justifications, or like T or theory, whatever, or just drop the argument, justifications why of getting RBI in that scenario, and then.
Oh, sorry, you got a minute.
Yeah, there's a minute left. And then there are also specific warrants. Specific warrants.
Okay,
you
that's
can spread
fine.
the one. Okay.
So 54 seconds left.
Were there questions in prep that were not clarification questions?
No.
Okay.
We flash.
Can you see this card that's like,
Alright.
Ripstein says.
What's he wanted?
C round 5. It's 2 off
Can
case.
I judge you in the round?
So Ripstein says
You
children
guys
from
were
force
pressing.
and freedom.
Yeah.
Can you like can you?
It's on my wiki, but
Oh, it's on your wiki.
you want full text?
I think I actually just have force and freedom, so I should be able to find it.
What is it called, Alex?
1 and C round 5.
This now brings us to the first, like,
Can you actually open force? Can you search your computer for force and freedom? The article. That's a book.
Let me just send you full text or something.
Yeah, that'd be tight. Send it to John.
Okay, ready?
It's just over his
Order.
2 off case.
Yep.
Moral uncertainty means to read extinction boss control. Moral uncertainty is pressing allergy. You might confuse the word uncertainty. There's reality preserving our ability right now to value. Ensure the future according to ensure the future humanity is the best way to increase future value. No activism to continue for states and opposed to actions to moral responsibility sensing. Unlike individual governments who face a choice between regular third parties when authorized for action and not refusing to act as soon authorized and unauthorized action because secure with government for private action without fully discourage it. Thus the standard, it demands some existential risk and presumption flows neg 1 negate means to deny truth of. So if the app has improved the resident true, I met my burden 2. The app is a positive burden of affirmation because affirm means to uphold or assert positively. So app has to show that unless you get medical rights. 3, it's more likely that a statement is false and true. All the conditions must be met to prove a statement true, but if one condition of the statement is false, then the statement is false. So next more probable for the app 3 speeches, so they get 3 chances to pursue you of their arguments. I only get 2, so presume neg to counterbalance the difference. Now disad healthcare is the state station momentum for more balanced federalism. Healthcare law is now strong now, but the plan ruins it. Lengo 14. Grief called the Obamacare pushback a watershed movement that prompted states to rediscover the proper roles. They are check and balance on the federal government healthcare performance. Properly constitutional argument of Obamacare taught states need to stick together. States have more leverage. Health law is a key feature of federalism Plan overturns the relative balance, turns case federalism the key to public health law and the medical system. Hodge 98. Legal struggles for limited powers occur within the federal state. Traditional ability to control, maintain public health remain contingent on the scope of powers. 1. Federalism are weakened or ignored. States lose to federal intervention. Federal preserve powers. The state and acts of barrier to federal intervention. Regulation has been the responsibility of state governments hanging the balance power. Goals of public health which lie on federalism. U.S. federalism is model and friends global nuclear war collaboration. 94. Federalism is the best and most important structural feature of U.S. Constitution. Public branches cannot be relied upon to enforce constitutional federalism, international law, and devolution federalism has swept across the world due to global fascination with an emulation around American federalism. Global trend greatly increases the likelihood of future peace, free trade, economic growth, and respect for social and cultural diversity and protection of individual human rights. Next off, autonomy is an illusion that an able-bodied constructs so as not to face the reality of disability. This escape learning disability as physiologically and ontologically inferior and validates disability as an existential status acute. So 7. The love of coherence and order keeps the threat of vulnerability at bay. It is the normative of all the body disabled and austerity. The whole of self is fantasy of enormity. Non-disabled people project their fear of death on disabled people who represent all these difficult aspects of human existence. First, the fear of physical fatigue, bodily difference, social vulnerability as protection on disabled, other social distance, posing a binary being the problem rests with the neurobody does not want to be reminded of its own vulnerability. Disabled body exposed illusion of autonomy, disability assumed to ontology and toppled as inherently negative. Focus on rationality is attained by ableist assumptions. To Kant, only Europeans count as fully human. All others must be forced to conform. Ease 97. Kant settled upon humanity sounds wide. A European and male Kant's philosophical anthropology reveals itself that Europe's self-image as superior and the rest is barbaric. Kantian abstract and colonized humanity by grounding the particularity European self-center as it denies humanity of this concept. Theories would compact the institution into one form which would destroy anyone who disagreed. Ableism attack oppression that can permeate all forms of discrimination, categorization based on neurobiological standards justifies every form of discrimination, violence. That is not to say issues such as class or secondary, but rather any movement should include the deconstruction of able normativity. Seavers 9. A person always focuses on how the body appears justified the attribution, natural inferiority, the prototype of biological inferiority, disability serves as a mass trope of being disqualification, physical and mental properties of the body, social constructive, disqualifying defects, oppressed identities represented in some way, statistical race and disqualified on the basis of race, sex, on the basis of sex or gender, class, on the basis of socioeconomic power, as proof of inferior genealogical status, ableism disqualifies on the basis of mental and physical differences representing signs of incompetence, weakness, or inferiority as nature. Our alternative, we should reject the affirmative approach to politics to favor dismodernist identity politics, inevitably shrewd and wounded attachment as essentialist only new, dismodern understanding identity consults the social stigma that creates racism, sexism, classism, and ableism, any perpetuation co-opts modernist through revival of the one normal subject. Davis 13. Rather than the unstable nature of disability, we should amplify qualities to create a mismodernist approach will characterize the limitation of identity group model as its exclusivity. Disability friends with a malleable view of the human body and identity. This modern era Russians that difference all of us have in common. The identity is not fixed but malleable. Dependence is rule form follows dysfunction, reacting localization identity. We need to consider new ethics of body. Here the body is now a requirement for existence in a consumer society. Cut the card of consumer society. Now case. Overview on case, they need to win that a lack of distinction justifies a positive obligation of passive policy or right. There is no warrant for this in the app. No distinction is just defense. Even if equality is a basic assumption, that doesn't justify giving a right to medical autonomy for everyone. Only that we should treat people equally. They have to win. An arbitrary discrimination in the context of medical autonomy means that you should vote at the, they say on their, under the burden structure, they say that rights are assumed, but we don't have to assume a right to murder or right to other things. They need to practically prove that right to medical autonomy is key. And on the meta ethic, reason fails to guide action. This stands the framework since the framework assumes we can use reason to gain knowledge about ethical truths. Empirics prove people ethically not to feel good, but not for reasons, but to feel good. Wes. Feelings are a means of knowing what we value. When we act truly, we pay the price with guilt. When we empathize, we enjoy the good we do. And second, no impact. This only says we act for reason, but that leaves open the question of what reason is authoritative. It still needs to prove that the reason is once universal being utilitarian is consistent. As long as the reason, since I would have a reason to promote good consequences, and off induction fails. One, deduction proves induction, since if there are no relative differences between situations, there is no reason the outcome will be any different. That makes it impossible to make a prediction based on past without relying on induction. Two, induction is an axiom in logic. You can't prove induction without using the rules of deduction. So instead, saying logic impossible, we should just accept the rules of logic. Three, if the rules of logic accepts that there is some interrelated to ascertain objective truths, since we can't know anything with absolute certainty. That means we should decide truth based on what is useful to believe. Fourth, deduction assumes induction, since there's no way to predict without using logical inference. Instead, we should know deduction works, since it always gets to the true conclusion. Now, off the argument that I have to defend that adolescents don't get it right. I mean, criticizing their assumption means the app is false, and you should vote negative. And their interpretation and criticism the underlying assumptions behind the affirmative. The argument about the Kantianism, and also their approach to autonomy. One is critique is coordinate ground. A, key check against new apps. We should be able to criticize the assumption if we have no prep against other parts of the app. B, the app should have to justify what they do. They have infinite prep to frontline the assumption. The critique is key to challenge the justification to check that advantage to answers to the limit standard. And C, they aren't allowed to pick the world the way the world works. Reciprocity demands that a negative gets a clash with their assumption. Ground always predictability. One, the app gets to pick the one AC and predict how to defend the IP. They can't predict everything, but next can't predict every app that shifts out of neg generics into critiques are the only stable strategy on a huge topic. Second is prep time, backpause, and analytics. You can beat a critique if you can predict it, but having nothing against the app makes it impossible. And error neg on app attempts to exclude neg ground. It's in the app interest to read theory, and they'll do it regardless of real abuse. Instead, said assumed background is legitimate, so reject the shelf when defense and abuse story. 2, critique is key to education. A, anything that excludes the judge's ability to not endorse an act that spouted hate speech is bad because proliferates offensive and problematic practices that ways. First, the judge and the responsible adult must make debate non-exclusionary. Your role as the judge can't override this ethical obligation, rejecting interrupts that keep you from fulfilling this role. 2, a safe debate environment promotes inclusion and participation, which is prerequisite to education fairness and supposed to assume participation in the activity. This means critique comes before theory of the impacts, voting on the critique precede the impacts of theory. Critique solves myopic discussions. Critical strategies show a contrary view can provide brainwashing from everyone agreeing their assumption which promote self-fruition and critical thinking. And on the condo lodge argument, 1, this is nonsensical. The resolution never assumes that morality is part of the statement, which means that you can't prove this. Second is all the presumption arguments also flow here. If the resolution is nonsensical, then you should presume negative. Now, on the underview, they say no RBIs for the neg, but neg gets RBIs on one end of theory. The neg can initiate 2 or theory of the NC. 1 is strategic application. RBIs make theory 2 ways 3. Otherwise, when it gets collapsed on what a layer is undercorrected, creating a functional nib for the neg. Uniquely true in this instance. A, I normally will initiate theory to make it reciprocal, but I cannot read new 2 NR theories since one error doesn't generate new advocacy. B, neg only gets once to reach a debate theory. That means I have no opportunity for second line comparison. Can't depend on my arguments. Only RBI solves since I can spend enough time on theory to compensate. C, 1 theory. Reverse the time scale 7-6 in the favor of additions. 2 is a unique 2 AR ability. 2 second line comparison. 2 is norm setting. A, RBIs are a prerequisite to accurate reevaluation of theory. Otherwise, unforced to undercome, they can win theory even if it's the wrong norm. B, chills privilege theory status quo reverse exposure cheap out theory. RBIs the best known grounds to debaters should defend their interval, also defend fair grounds, defend counter interpret. 3rd is reciprocity. The app gets RBIs repeats and advance. We are also able to do otherwise it's bad for structural burdens.
Okay, so you didn't read the norm setting arguments?
I did read the norm setting arguments.
You did. Which argument? Did you read everything?
I'll delete which things I didn't read in the speech check.
Okay.
But I read all the arguments for the argument.
Okay.
So, did read that. Did you cut this card?
No, I didn't.
Okay, I cut it at consumer survey.
Yeah. You only read what's highlighted, right?
Yep.
Okay. Wait, that's another card.
And I
Oh, you didn't read that card? Okay. Awesome. Right. Cool. Ready?
Yes.
Is a criticism a criticism of autonomy in general, or just specific the AF's conception of autonomy?
It's a criticism of the AF's conception of autonomy as related to rationality. Specifically, the E's evidence is a criticism of your justification.
Wait, but if the AF is specifically saying that there's no distinction between the autonomy between individuals, right? Why is that linking into the K? Would that be a no-link argument?
Sorry, repeat your
I don't
question.
understand how my autonomy is flawed if I'm specifically saying that there's no like a difference in the autonomy between adolescents and adults, right?
Okay, so the critique criticizes your conception of autonomy. It is not a criticism of
what is the
autonomy
AF's
in general.
conception of autonomy?
For example, your AF says that the way we judge freedom or understand like human worth is through reason and our capacity to make rational decisions, which is all of the reasons for why your meta.
Okay, so what's the conception of autonomy in the 1 and C?
Okay, so do you want me to explain the alternative? Is that your question? Okay, so the Davis 13 evidence says that dismodernism is a new approach to politics which seeks to transform the way we understand difference. So rather than viewing difference as something that is deviancy from a set norm, we should amplify those differences and realize that all of us are the same.
So let's talk about the dissad. The dissad only you only win the dissad. You don't link it to framework, right? Only if you win the framework at the top of the 1 and C.
I made the argument it turns case because it hurts people. So
wait, how does that prove that there's no morally relevant distinction?
Okay, so it doesn't link to your burn structure.
Okay,
That's
awesome, cool. Let's talk about the arguments you made against the 5th argument, the burn structure, against why you like the paragraph theory shell. Yeah, the paragraph theory shell. What were the arguments?
Okay. Oh, you mean
can you go through the arguments you made against? Yes.
You mean the critiques?
No. So I wrote a shell that you must concede that capable adults have the right to make autonomous choices, right? You responded to that. What were the responses, or did you not respond?
Okay, which spike are you talking about? I'm not sure.
Okay. That's fine. The paragraph theory shell.
Okay. So
did you not respond to it?
What are you talking about?
That's fine. So let's talk about the arguments you read at the top when you went on case. You said that I need to prove a proactive obligation possibility. What does that mean?
So the framework doesn't provide a reason that we're morally obligated to provide a right to adolescence. It just says that there's no distinction, but that doesn't give us a proactive justification for that.
But you can test the arguments in the AF why the negative has a proactive burden to prove no morally relevant distinction. Or do you have any offense? Do you have any offense coming on the AF why there's no morally relevant distinction?
So I read a counterinterp that says that the
No, I
negative
understand
should
the
be able to clash with
counterinterpretation.
the assumptions of
I
the
want to know specifically, what did you read any offense that could win you offense under the under the affirmative version?
No.
Okay, awesome. So yeah, let's talk about that counterinterpretation. What were the arguments you made under that counterinterpretation? That's what I was talking about.
Oh, okay. So one is that critiques are coordinate ground. There are 4 reasons why that's true.
Yeah.
And also that the negative. Sorry, correct.
Yeah.
Also that the negative should be able to clash with the assumption.
It's everything that's in the doc, right?
Yeah. I also answered your limit standard.
By saying what?
By saying that the AF chose their affirmative and they should be able to justify it.
Okay, that's fine. Okay, 1:30 left. I'm reading some new stuff. Do you want me to compile it?
Yeah.
Okay. Yep. If you want to watch me, I'm not doing pro.
Right.
Ultimately probably means like a few instances. So you just watch out for those.
A priori someone to rob. So true. He says this is what he's reading, or this is what he's reading?
That's what he's reading. And it's actually really solid. Read this
Okay, so the order is going to be starting on the paragraph theory shell and the AC. It'll be a full extension, and then it's going to be on his arguments against that. So yeah, just interactions with that. Then it's going to be a new off, and then down the K.
Okay.
Okay. Is everyone ready?
Yep.
Yep.
Yeah.
He should have did a lot more work on the shell. First of all, always err my way on the shell because he responded to it. So obviously he is going to be some kind of evaluation. Now you can send the interpretation as a all thing also specifically out of what's not have the right to make a toss smoke. The evaluation is going to be coming out of the okay. He talks about autonomy and bad as a bad general is a bad conception. Also, he's dropping way too many words. He only responds to the limits warrant. But first of all, his limits warrant is literally BS. He talks about I'm going to know what I'm reading the AC, but that's not talking about limit topics. The actual idea in the topic is that limits are generic bad because it's extra topical because it makes the idea of adolescence in the resolution a meaningless specification. That is the limits argument. He doesn't understand the limits argument. That also that's just a defense. He doesn't have any offensive interpretation. You can send A, the reciprocity claim, the whole entire show goes into B, the reciprocity claim. Otherwise, they can deny anyone. They can deny both, which is a 2-to-1 advantage. And the clash game, which they can move 6 minutes of AC offense, which gives me like the education and Ferris voter. Ferris voter is basically the fact that you vote for the better, not the better. 2 educate your own school fund. Drop the better 1 fair score. Excuse my evaluation. So the second, drop the arguments. No punishment. Also using Peter Brace 1. A recent place completely arbitrary. Second of all, fosters based on top by fostering better interpretation for the debate. We're also no RBIs. One, you can first of all cross by all the arguments. The AC would go completely drop the arguments. Specifically drop the argument. Also going to be warranted by they justify an RBI on drop the bear specifically on my shells. Also they just drop the argument. So obviously drop the bear is always going to cross by. Now go to his arguments for drop the for the RBI. First of all, he talks about the allocation reciprocal. But first of all, just because I'm sorry, that doesn't mean anything. Your ability to adapt the AC is always going to be worse. Now the second argument is reciprocal theory. He only gets 1 speech to respond. This was AC theory. You have 2 speeches to respond. This argument doesn't make any sense. Now the next argument is going to be the time skew argument. The time skew argument is outweighed by the arguments that are implicitly in the AC that you have 2 speeches to respond. Also, it's not about a time skew. It's not about speech skew. Then we both get 30 minutes. I get 3 speeches. It's about the rebuttal skew. You obviously get more rebuttal skew because you get 30 minutes of rebuttal skew. I have much less rebuttal skew. Also, at the point where the show was in the AC, that's gonna be reason to vote it up. But the problem is the arguments that he made generic to the shell are just reasons why K is core neg ground, but not specifically why the idea of making a toss medical choices specifically to the app is core, specifically to adolescents and not adults is core neg ground, which means he does this is non-responsive to the app. Let's answer them anyways. The first argument that key check against negative ass because they would be able to criticize the assumptions of the app, but that is not a good argument. You can check in many other ways, like such as engaging the app. You could turn back the app. You don't do that. It's your fault. Now the B argument is that you should just be able to justify what you choose in infinite pre-run prep time, but that's your ability to adapt, which means you always adapt. You don't have to read this K. There's many other ways you can engage the app. The C argument is that you aren't allowed to pick out of any specific words of resolution. This argument doesn't make any sense. Now go to the ground outweighs predictability. The first argument that the app is always gets to pick in the A1 AC, but first of all, the predictability argument there was not predictability in the AC. There's other arguments such as reciprocity argument was always going to outweigh the ground argument because reciprocal burns is structural burns in the round. The ground argument should say substantive abuse. Structural abuse obviously comes before substantive abuse. And also he goes error neg on app attempts to exclude neg ground on theory. I'm not trying to exclude your ground. I'm trying to be able to have a reasonable one here that I'm actually able to respond to. He talks about the critique is key to education, but reasons why I answer that argument. First, excluding fairness from the rule of fails because fairness is independently valuable. 2 reasons. First, the basic practice game between 2 participants imply neither debate can have advantage of the rules. Fairness can be restricted aim in debate. Second, fairness is constrained on debating the winner. Whoever treated can be better equal starting points. So skip the card off. First, sorry. But gaining competition encouraged them to be the concept of utilitarianism has always been anti-black and keeps the failed consideration of the black community irrelevant. Blaker. The aim of utilitarianism in American politics and race only savvy, but one is the most whiteness of a majority of certain interests in the white idea of the unity of perfect certain condition narrow conservative to the American idea of vote neg endorsing racism is key because of the performance and the evidence you should reject racism. Whether you should judge only doing the better debate using equal ability to debate framework always excludes T-Han. Arguments about talking about debates unique make assumptions safely that you cannot choose a safe place because of homophobia, rape, and other debate privilege, but built in the round, which means can only for people exist in the real world everyday ideas. Now go to his alt. First of all, perm to the app in the K, but that beneficial because obtain specific benefits implementing the app will also solve for the arguments in the K. Second, perm to the app in the K is bad because they're criticizing the status quo. A only solves C, also be able to solve, or B, they're also not strong enough to solve. Also, next, perm to acknowledge the K and do the app anyways, incorporate what we've learned for debate and decision making, but just vote app. Also, these are just approaches. Also, the in my case, always going to first because it criticizes the idea of hidden utilitarianism last week. Just going to be a discourse K. It's always going to come before his false making. Just also the autonomy link is very weak.
Okay.
I'll put out what I didn't read.
Yeah.
You want me to?
Let's. So, didn't read this card.
No, I didn't read the card, but I read the argument above the card. Like,
Okay.
yeah, I read the tag.
Okay.
Didn't read 3. Go up. I read the T-hand.
Okay.
I read Baker. I didn't read the speed point. So, yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Go up.
RBI.
I didn't read the Adler card. No.
I disclose my Caden.
Go up. Go up.
Right now.
Didn't read
No, I didn't read the E card. Go up. I read that.
Okay,
That was just
yeah.
extensions. I read
Okay.
everything else.
How much time do I have?
54.
54. Alright, starting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's up to you if you want to disclose or disclose. She says she prefers more topic-specific links. So I hope you have topic-specific links.
So, I'll make a bunch on piece. Are you reading something new?
Yeah. Yeah. Let me just put this card in there. Okay. 2 an hour and 5. Alright. So order is going to be overview. Okay. So order is overview, then the theory, the extension of the theory shell, starting on my counter interpretation, then go into his extension, and then the new off that he read, and then the critique.
Give me 1 second.
Okay.
Also, would you mind like saying that one more time?
Sure. So starting on the theory shell,
Okay.
then the new off that you read,
Okay.
and then the critique.
Okay, awesome.
All right.
Give me 1 sec.
Starting with an overview.
Yep.
All right. Everyone ready?
Paul has read a Tihan card in the last speech that justifies the constitutional role of the judge to be an educator who makes the debate space safe, which means that if I win that critique, if I win the critique, then it doesn't matter because he has conceded critique comes before theory. Second is that he has conceded we meet to the theory show, which means that the critique justifies that the adolescent should not get this medical right, which means that we also clash with the affirms. It means the theory show also doesn't matter. Now, my counter interpretation, extend that the negative should be able to clash with the assumptions of the affirmative. Extend the first argument is ground because it's a key way to check against new apps. He says that there are other ways to check against apps like frameworks or dissets, but this doesn't matter. Because this doesn't matter. Critiques are still core ground of the topic. All the evidence of the one I see proves that it's a valuable way for us to discuss topics, and critiques are better than other types of ground for 3 reasons. One is that they're able to challenge types of power structure rather than just reading dissets, which is a different type of argument. Second is that there's no unique reason for why dissets and frameworks are better, which means the default to the arguments in the education standard, which prove that critiques are a good way for us to to argue against AF is a core part of core negative strategy. Next, he says that there are other ways to adapt, but this doesn't apply to my argument. It says the AF has chosen the one I see, and because they disclose it, I have disclosed my autonomy critique full text, and they should be able to predict what things link to that, which means also answers your argument about why the NC can be adapted, and you should be able to predict your critiques. One is infinite prep time. You have unlimited prep, which is the argument 1 and C. Second is regardless whether you can predict the critique, you should be able to defend the assumptions of absence as part of defending AF, which you have to do with or without critiques. This is attacking the assumption of the AF is the same as any other argument, which means that this answers the arguments why I can adapt. Third is that AFs are obviously expect to predict this as. This equally applies to critiques. You should predict critiques with link to your representations. His argument about the T and card also proves that reps focus is valuable for us. Topic prep solves the most absent topic rely on few assumptions with negative authors criticize. This is the base of all critiques which you should predict. If you did topic prep, the ability to critique is the core part of the negative strategy on the topic. You should be able to answer. 5 disclosure means you can tell which critiques link to your AF and which don't. That's the argument 4. Now extend the ground outweighs. He says that AF is able to pick other arguments, and he says that the AF has other arguments, but the core of the affirmative strategy on the theory shell is to say that that he should not be forced to defend these kind of assumptions. But my argument is that this loss of net ground outweighs that loss of fairness for 2 reasons. One is that you're able to pick the AF. Second is that all your softs you have the AF is also reasons why you can beat the critique, because you have a defense of your advocacy, then you can answer that. Now next, extend the second standard that is key to education. He has massively undercovered this. He says that fairness precludes education, but I have a marginal link to fairness, and he has conceded this massive link to education, which means that I still outweigh, even if one marginally outweighs the other in a vacuum. Extend the A point for hates that the judge should not endorse hate speech if any reasons that their interpretation allows the judge to endorse a debater who says the N word or says something very racist is reason why you should reject interpretation. Extend that one, the judge should be a responsible adult. Their T-hand evidence proves this. Second is that the debate should be a safe activity. All their fairness and education arcs presume that critique that people are able to participate in the activity in the first place, where the critique denies. Now extend the critique comes from theory, prevents myopic discussion that doesn't understand the assumptions of the topic and allows fairness oppression continue, which also answers their argument about why fairness is axiomatic. Even if fairness is part of the activity, the critique controls the internal link to theory, which means that also answers your argument why the theory comes before the K. Now on his shell. First, he extends reciprocity. He extends reciprocity, but all the arguments in the next round standard also answer this, because it's also a structural skew, because it changes the way that I'm able to engage the app and excludes a structural part of next skew. There's no quantification what substantive versus structural is, and there's very few ways that last speech allowed to extrapolation. Now of Clash, he has conceded the neg. The critique argument are good for education argument, which means I also outweigh on strength of link to education. No impact for why Clash is key. The critique says that it's key for us to research out of round research, because otherwise we are unable to engage in oppression and other arguments in round, which also outweighs your extension of the Clash. And I've answered the limits already. All the arguments in the critique prove that this is a core part of the negative strategy, which means that it is not extra T, because it still engages the question of adolescence. All the links to critique are reasons why I meet, because it's not a criticism of the resolution, rather a criticism of the AF approach. Now critique. His new critique. One is that he has conceded the link. He has conceded the links to the link to the ability to critique why Kant's theory is racist, which means that if I put any link on this, I weigh on strength of link on the argument why util is anti-black. One is that util is key to prevent anti-blackness, justifies why we should treat people as humans and prevent suffering in the long term, which is better for people who are oppressed, because it brings their perspective into the round. Second is that second is the extinction is bad because it affects everybody, which means that there's no reason why historically bad justifies why my representations are bad. Now on the critique proper. Extended Davis 13 evidence that this modernism is valuable off the group of permutations. One is that the double blind doesn't solve, because the argument is that autonomy is a key crux of part of ableism, which means that it doesn't solve, which means that the double blind argument doesn't apply. Second is that the permutation is in way to assimilate their experience without addressing pragmatic approaches. This modernism says that we should reform our approach to politics. It's a representation critique, means that you don't get permutations. This debate is a question of whether your reps in the first speech were bad, and you can't alter those now. That's severance. Severance is bad because it gets you out of links from net ground. Also creates a shifting advocacy. Next, he says that you can affirm the policy and also acknowledge the mindset. This is a possible one that creates pity. It's a pity disab, because you treat people with disability as something that's secondary to movement. It's a sequencing question, which means that you should call for the Davis 13 evidence. It's that reform a question of politics is prior and conceptual analysis is better. And second is that all the links are disadvantages to your permutation. He hasn't answered the Hughes 7 evidence or the East 97 evidence that historically been used to justify oppression against people with disabilities, and autonomy is tell people in wheelchairs that they should lift themselves out by their their bootstraps to justify endless oppression. Extended Sieber's 9 evidence that ableism is the worst root cause of oppression.
Okay, how much time do I have left? I already done something.
125.
Alright, cool.
What else are we doing? We're gonna see whether we okay. Turns to that. I mean, be careful when you answer that. Just make sure. You can just ask him straight up across the board. So he doesn't get like experiencing how interacts with a pre-FIAC and yeah. He'll probably just be like, oh, I'm not gonna do your work for you. You should make our argument in a lens. He was just like, I should get her to I should make my responses in the tune arc. Because I don't know what the function of all arcs are. That turns it context.
Parents in possession of their children. Children are not the same parties to consent. They're not competent to consent so long as they are children.
That's the terms context. It's unified with parents.
Why? This is their basically the property.
I think that's fine.
That's it? Okay.
Yeah, people tag it.
Okay, cool. It's going to be starting on the shell, the app, and then it's going to be engaging between the two Ks.
Okay.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Ready?
He can see there's no RVI in theory. That means it's a no risk issue for me, even if he's winning any of the interpretation coming out of those arguments. So now go to the specifics of the shell proper. The problem is always arguments specific to why K is good ground. He disregards the argument on my waist, but they're not specifically to why Adam's not right. There's just reasons why K is good ground. I'm not denying you K ground. I'm denying you this specific K ground, which means you can have that K ground, which means not unique. That means all his opposite goes away. It's very clear that one right here. So if I can just prove that theory comes before K is game over. You can send the arguments coming out of the last speech. There were specific arguments. He talks about I don't delineate between structural and substantive abuse, but there's a clear delineation. I said how many hoops you have to jump through to win the round. Obviously, it's not structural abuse because it gives him a 2-to-1 advantage. I specifically said a 2-to-1 advantage. If he doesn't have a 2-to-1 advantage, not substantive abuse, he says he cannot respond to this argument. I say ground. Obviously, ground is just a substantive advantage because I'm just denying you certain amount of ground. That means structural abuse always can outweigh substantive abuse. That's a huge internal link to the fairness claims. His education claims do not matter. He talks about critical education. It's more important, but there are specific arguments. There were two arguments. The first argument that I'm not able to engage your position in the first place, and the second argument is that I can't engage in your position and take it seriously. The judge will not take your discourse seriously if we do not look to theory first. Those were clear terms. Now he talks about the TN card role judges makes debate a safer place. I'm saying the only way we can do that is first engage in the fairness discussion. This doesn't exclude that. My specifically talk about my fairness constraint on the discourse in the round. Also, he talks about I can see it before theory, but I do not do that. There were two arguments. You can cross by those arguments. Also, he talks about he meets the theory show, but I said always err my way on the I meet argument because at the point where he responds to each other, there's always going to be some error. There's always error my way. Also, he says he just reads a critique specific to that, but that's not true. He denies the idea of autonomy in general. It's very clear violation. Now he talks about ground. Ground is key. He's shaking the app's K ground. Also, there's no reason the parameters are better. You can group the force for arguments. He just cross application of the TN card. But he also he's winning the app ground, but the ground argument is not always can be outweighed by the women's ground. He tries to suspend the women's argument. The women's ground argument is again makes him to understand the argument. He talks about proving autonomous is denying the assumption of the atlas of the resolution means that totally is unreciprocal, which means I cannot predict app. He talks about the brochures goes on the wiki, but I don't know specific what links you are going to draw from the app on the wiki. You can have multiple cases on the wiki. Also, there's unverifiable. Now go to the K proper. The problem is he's dropping the second term, which is do the app and then the K, which means it's going to solve because we just do all, and then the third one, which is do all the app and all non-competitive parts of the K. He just responds to the one where you can just do that and just endorse the mindset and the double bind perp. He doesn't endorse those two, which means game over on the K. Also, I made an argument in the last at the end of my speech that there's always going to be a risk of a no link argument because the app idea of autonomy is not always going to be conceptualized that way under some instances. Just mean that there's no link. That means you're always going to evaluate the app because there's always my K first because there's actually a risk of the no link argument. He doesn't have any no link arguments coming out of the util K, but also he's like it's ableism and distinctions wouldn't have largest impact. Obviously, racism is bad. That means oppression is bad. So the only argument he could possibly win right now is the Seaver's argument. This is the root cause of oppression. But first of all, the arguments coming out of the ACA, you can send the argument that this is specific to his discourse in the roundabout. Utils actually recognize the greatest good for the greatest. Not people. Me, discourse case are always coming up first. I made the argument in the last speech. It's me. His game over on the K debate. His root cause of reason the Seaver's card goes away because I have no weak argument. So you always have, it's easier to vote on the Util K. Also, he doesn't make arguments, so I don't link to the rollabout. So the rollabout is the same. That means you always vote on my K first. He doesn't do any responses. I always have some no link arguments on the on his K.
I see interpretation.
Yeah.
Yep.
Make the theory in 1C and just drop the argument. Something I'll get rid of the app.
Like plan's good.
Yeah, plan's good, or like parameters, util, or some crap.
I don't know where the
Maybe not the second one, but
Yeah.
You want to just delete everything off this computer?
Possibly.
Or? Okay. I'm gonna go fill my water. Oh, that's fine.
applying in colleges right now?
Yep.
Stressful?
Very stressful.
Were you applying early?
I'm EDing. I don't know if I'm gonna get in. It's kind of a reach, but EDing in Brown,
Okay. Yeah.
and then some state schools.
Yeah.
Applying to some of the UC schools.
Oh, seriously?
Yeah.
Do you?
Like I'm applying to UCLA, Berkeley, and Santa Barbara.
Fuck you, dude. Those were made for us. Not
Dude,
for-
I'm not even near you. You don't have to worry about
I
it.
know.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's basically
Sorry.
it.
That was my mama. You know how mamas.
Do I have time to go get water?
Yeah, you're okay.
Okay.
2 and R framing on kind of fairness versus education. I think he's got a ton of offense that just by virtue of too much to cover in the 2AR, you don't really get a deal with a ton. I think the move to go substantive, structural, and say reciprocity is a good one, but a lot of that stuff is fairly new in the 2AR, not really explained in the 1AR. And so I think he has a lot of offense for why Ks are good and why Ks that don't meet your interpretation are good, and I'll go through those arguments in a sec. The way I end up voting on the K is you've conceded that we shouldn't get perms in reps debate, and it's only about was the AF a good representation. I don't think you get a no-link argument because that was after time in the 1AR. I recall it. I consciously didn't flow it. I think you were just like, this is a weak link, so I thought that analysis was new. You drop the Zebra's evidence, so I mean there is an impact to this K, and he does have link defense to util. So on your own grounds of strength of link on the K debate, he has decent defense on, well, I don't know if I like it. It's just kind of generic, like extinction is bad, util is good to prevent suffering. It doesn't really engage very much with the link, but at least it's an answer, whereas you have no link D on the ableism K, so I can vote neg there. So, but going back to the theory argument, I thought for a second maybe I liked the I-meet, but I end up thinking it's not good, because interpretation of the app is very specific, that you have to have a specific K, or all of your offense has to be specific to adolescents not getting the right, and you win. The neg proves that it's specific, or it disproves the AF for sure, but that wasn't the question. It's not. Yes, the K disproves that adolescents should get medical rights to autonomy, but it doesn't disprove, or it does not do that in a way that would allow adults to get a right to autonomy. So you would need a K link argument that says conceptions of autonomy when applied to adolescents are bad, not conceptions of autonomy in general. So I think that the neg definitely violates. I end up not having to think too much really about K versus theory, because I think that a lot of the neg arguments for why Ks would come before theory, the extension of the TN stuff, make more sense and are also impacts to a lot of the like K good arguments. So if we were winning these arguments, they also just win the theory debate. On the theory standards proper, I think the neg has a lot of ground arguments that are not dealt with very well. He says that Ks are key to clash with AF, they're key to check infinite prep time and the ability to pick the AF. They're key to engage oppression, power structures, and the neg evidence proves it's a key quality ground within the topic lit. And then all of this ground arguments are impacted by the TN evidence, the K first arguments, like they're key to participation, preventing myopic discussion that obscures. The big mitigation that the AF gives that I think is kind of clever, but not developed enough, is the argument that I can concede Ks are good in general, but not these kinds of Ks. But I think to win this argument, you need to prove that there really is quality K ground that exists under your interpretation. So he has made a big DA that's like, there would be no Ks. And then you're like, no, there just wouldn't be some types of Ks. But you have to prove that the class that is included with your interpretation actually gets the benefits that he's talking about. So you need to provide examples of what these Ks would be. And obviously this is where the interpretation doesn't do very well, because, I mean, what Ks are there of adolescent autonomy specifically? This is not an argument that the 2NR makes, and should be much better on this argument, on what K ground would this leave me with. But since I don't know, I can't give the AF a no link on this standard. I think the neg does have an answer to this as well, which is the hate speech argument, that there are reasons why Ks that don't negate specifically adolescent autonomy or adolescent medical rights are good, because if the AF said something really offensive like the N-word, yeah, my negative would not answer adolescent autonomy, but that's still really important, impacted by all the T-hand stuff and all the K good arguments. So I think this is important ground. Now when I'm weighing ground versus reciprocity, I'm inclined to agree with substantive structural arguments. I'm not sure that this really is a good one, and I don't think that the analysis in the 2AR is all in the 1AR. So what I have flowed in the 1AR is just, where is this? Let me find it. You say in answer to his like clash predictability arguments, ground versus predictability, you say I outweigh ground because I'm structural, ground is just substantive, and structural obviously outweighs. And I don't have a better explanation than that.
Okay.
And it's possible that maybe it was in there, it was like 6 words, and I just, maybe there was like a little blip there, but I think if you're going to make a big categorical weighing argument like this, it's got to be a bigger part of the speech. It's got to be, this is a definition of fairness. This determines what ground is relevant. And I just don't have any of that in the 1AR. I just have obviously outweighs. And maybe it is just substantive abuse, and I can agree with you, but just saying it obviously outweighs isn't enough. So I think, you're poor both on the categorization and on why one would outweigh the other. I also think that there's defense on reciprocity, which is that you should be able to predict it since it was in your AF, and you're like, oh, but there could be cases of lots of things in the AF. But yes, but I think this provides at least some kind of check that you could have answered something. I think you should provide examples of what this would justify. So you should be like, just because it's in the AF doesn't mean it's predictable. For example, like I said the word the, but the pick out of the is not really a good ground for me to answer. I think the neg provides some examples of how you could answer it. He's like, you could use your own AF solvency to say that's better than what the alternative does for adolescents with disabilities. And the neg needs to do a lot better on showing what the AF strategy is. What is the ground to answer the ableism K? What arguments are there? What quality ground is there? And even a step further would be, how would an AF like this answer the ableism K? Because that's what really matters in this debate is, was there a 1AR strategy available to the AF? I also think that, well, let me just wrap this up before I give a little more advice. There's more defense, like it's disclosed, it's your own AF. It's not great, but at least it's defense on reciprocity, and since I think the neg's winning their ground argument so strong, that it's pretty good. And then in terms of the impact weighing, I think education matters and fairness matters in this debate, and I agree with the neg that they have a lot of education offense. And I also think that they're just pretty close on the fairness debate, even if I agree with a lot of this reciprocity extensions. There are some extensions for why theory or fairness would come before education. It's not really clear. The extensions in the 2AR are AT critical education. 1, I couldn't engage in the first place. I think his defense on reciprocity kind of answers that, although I would like some more examples of what that engagement would look like. And then the second argument, not taken seriously, I don't have that in the 1AR at all, and I'm looking throughout. The arguments I have you making for fairness first in the 1AR are the rules argument, constraint on determining the winner, a kind of skew argument, and punishment argument for fairness. But I don't have a lot of this strong kind of K or theory or fairness before any K education or before the K at all. And I think I end up evaluating all of this debate kind of holistically, because I don't think there's a lot of delineation made between like which arguments function to prove theory before K, or is it instead fairness before education, or is it instead fairness before critical education. And I think they're interrelated enough for me to think that the extension of THAN and those participation and oppression arguments also interact with fairness. I end up viewing them on kind of the same level. So I can think theory comes first and think the neg wins theory, and then I go to the K. Other kinds of advice, I think the negative needs to have a better counterinterpretation. I think you should say that you get to read this K so long as you don't say that adolescents aren't competent, because that would seem to solve the reciprocity concern. So if he says you get 2 options, right? You can say adolescents not competent, or you can say just like no rights to medical autonomy. And I actually think this is a really clever way to deal with Ks. I think it's a cool theory interpretation that's better than a lot of the ones that people are reading. Just like a true kind of reciprocity argument. So the neg should say I can pick one of those 2 outs. And I actually did that in this debate. There's still a reciprocity concern, right? I mean, you could read 7 minutes of skep and you only have 1 out, but there still might be a reciprocity issue because you have the option to choose multiple outs. But at least you mitigate a good portion of that offense. I think the 1AR is just a little risky. I think you need offense on the ableism K. I think that the counter K was not the right idea. First of all, reading THAN was risky just because I I mean, this was a kind of foreseeable 2-R where he concedes TN is like this comes first, makes a bunch of K versus theory weighing, and then but you also give him the option of RVI too. I mean, that's the thing. This 2-R is pretty easy because all he has to do is beat theory, and then he can either go for the RVI or the ableism K. And giving both those options, and I know you have offense on both, but you don't have really a credible out on ableism, which made that one a pretty obvious choice for the 2-R. Read some kind of link terms, make some analytics. I don't know. If you really have no game on ableism, then yes, this 1-ARK is the right option. But if you have some way to develop offense, then you should do that instead and not read this other role about it. I think that's the main issue, is that it takes too much to get offense off of this because you have to read your util bad card and your TN card. Whereas if you just read like link terms or like had a good perm card on ableism, that would take less time. It would concede less on the K versus theory debate, and force him to spend more time winning ableism proper. So that would have been the better 1-AR choice. But as was, I thought the 2-AR was really good. I don't even want to call it a recovery because I didn't think you were behind, but I thought you made good decisions. There's just so much neg offense on theory that I think.
Do you think the 2-AR should have went all in on theory?
Yeah, I think so. I thought it was good for the decision you made.
Yeah.
But I was kind of surprised in your overview when you were like, and I'm going to go to the K. You're just getting beat on the K. There's too much there. And you didn't have enough offense. So, yes, I think all in on theory 2-AR would have been a much better choice.
Okay.
Any other questions?
We just go speaker points.
Yeah, it was 29-5, 29-3.
Alright,
Thank
thanks.
you.
Yep.